So, how do you guarantee that journalists will write about you, your company? How do you guarantee that you will be featured positively in your target media? And how can you guarantee that that coverage, media exposure, can be secured on an ongoing basis? Well, you can guarantee it. You hear so often about how results cannot be guaranteed. Well, yes, they can. And I'm going to tell you how you can guarantee media exposure, positive media exposure for your company on a regular and ongoing basis. Now, the first, most obvious way is to be pitching a good news story to your target media. And again, whether this is national media, whether this is specialist sector media or regional media, the same principles apply. The first one is that you have to, obviously, and this can be the most important, often the hardest part, is you have to have a good story to be pitching to your target media. And I'm going to come to on later about what to do if you don't have a good story, a great story to pitch to your target media. But the hardest part is knowing what story will be used by your particular media, your target media. And when we work with clients, I always say, look, you have to know the media as well as you know your company. So let's say you're targeting the national media, and it might be the health sections of that media, for example. Then you have to know, for example, every one of the national media in the UK, let's use the UK as an example. There'll be the Daily Mail, the Mirror, the Sun, the Times, the Telegraph. They will all obviously will cover health, and they all have particular angles or inclinations or audiences that they are producing their stories for, and each of those media are often interested in different angles. So that's why it's very, very important when you are thinking about what news story you can pitch to your target media. Again, I'm giving a national media example, a healthcare example, that you know what particular angle or demographic that particular media might be interested in, and what kind of stories that a particular journalist on that particular target media is interested in receiving. So it's very, very important, before you even actually think about pitching a story to your target media, you know what story that target media might be interested in. Once you know that, and how do you know that? Well, you can find out previous stories and coverage that that particular media has covered in relation to healthcare stories, for example. You can make sure that if you are going to pitch a story to that target media, that it's not been covered before, recently, in the last few months. I mean, that's a no-go automatically. Is you must be very, very careful that you don't pitch stories that have already been used by your target media relatively recently. Otherwise, it's not a news story. I've seen that mistake happen a number of times. And if you are pitching a story that's related to something that has been covered in the past, you have to make sure you've got a new angle on it. So that's the first thing. And also, when you are targeting, let's say, the national media, it's going to be a great story. It's going to be a great story. It's going to be a very hard-hitting story to even be in chance with the coverage. You know, it's different for some of the sector media and some of the regional media, but for the national media, it's going to be a good story. You don't even think about it if it's not a good story that you're pitching. Otherwise, you can be emailing and phoning journalists as much as you like, but they won't be interested. So this is absolutely key. And as I said, I'm going to come back to you about what to do if you haven't got what you think is that good news story to pitch to your target media. But if you do that process, if you go through that process, making sure that you know your media as well as you know your company, and making sure that, we call it an audit, so like a forensic audit. We're quite forensic in terms of making sure that that target, you know that target media inside out. You don't need necessarily, and this is absolutely key, you don't even need to know necessarily the journalist. You don't need to have a great contact, but at the end of the day, every media and every journalist is interested in the story. That's the most important thing from their point of view. So whether or not you know that particular journalist, whether you've got his or her phone number, whether you've had dealings with he or she before, is not particularly important. It's all about the story that you're pitching. So there is an added element to this about the importance of how you pitch to journalists on your target media, whether it's via email, how you do your follow-ups, how you use social media, when you follow up and pitch to journalists. But that's all in the processes. But if you make sure that you have in your own mind that great or good story that you are pitching to the target media, and you follow up and you use the processes of follow-up, which I have mentioned previously in other videos, then you will guarantee coverage. You will, as long as you go through those processes and all those processes have been fulfilled and you have got a genuinely good story. So that's the news release, and again the same principles apply to regional media, industry specific media, vertical media, however you might like to call it. And this applies to all sectors: technology, healthcare, food, restaurants, or whatever sector you're in. Those same processes apply. They can be slightly different, but the same processes are absolutely vital. The second way to guarantee exposure, and again on an ongoing basis, is make sure you pitch expert opinion pieces to your right. You know, some media are not interested in expert opinion, but some are, and you need to know out of your target media, because you're in whichever sector you are in, you're probably going to have up to 30 target media who represent the audience you want to reach. So many of those will have possibilities for expert opinion. That's whereby you are positioning yourself as an expert in a particular area, and you are pitching to that target media to write an expert opinion piece article, bylines by you. So that's about positioning yourself as a national expert, a region, or an industry expert. And we've seen this happen so many times in a very successful way. Again, you have to know your media, the editor, making sure that the expert opinion angle that you pitch is absolutely spot on. So that goes again to this idea of making sure that you know the media that you're targeting and the kind of expert opinion pieces that they might be interested in, and B, making sure that you're not pitching something that's been covered before. Again, how you pitch that expert opinion piece proposal comes with its own methods and processes to make sure you do it in the best way, and follow-up is always key here. You'll often hear me talking about follow-up, because if you've got a great expert opinion and a great news story that you feel is very strong, then you have to follow it up until, sometimes I say to my colleagues, follow up to the death. That's follow up until you get a yay or nay, or not interested now but maybe later response from your target journalist. So expert opinion is the second way to secure ongoing and guaranteed media exposure or articles in the relevant media that you are targeting. The third way, and this goes back to if you feel you haven't got a strong news story to pitch to your target media. So, you know, particularly for national media, particularly when everyone wants their company to be featured in national media, but often there just generally is not a strong enough story to pitch. that will actually guarantee you that coverage. But, and this is very, very important, if you use a survey approach, what do I mean a survey approach? What I mean is by you are asking members of the public, usually members of the public, can sometimes be in your own data, whereby you are asking members of the public on a particular poll question, where they come up with that poll comes up with an answer that will secure you national media exposure. So it's and you'll see it in the media that you read. It's like, according to a survey, so and so many people like to do this on holiday, or a recent survey found that. Now, why is that featured so much in the national media? It's that it's a genuine news story. You have to make it a genuine, authentic news story by making sure that the poll is authoritative and comprehensive, and making sure that it's members of the public, often, not always, that are being polled. And it's a reasonable polled number, so it's 2,000. Let's say people who are in this, who participate in this poll. Now, yes, you can guarantee media exposure, and I mean guaranteed national media exposure, whatever your company, let me emphasize that, whatever your company using this approach. And there are a number of third parties, particularly on the survey approach, who it's often important to come in alliance with, who will help you guarantee that media exposure. So let me just emphasize, I do mean guaranteed media exposure. So that's another survey approach, is that third way. Yes, of course, there are other possibilities. There's stunts. There is more that kind of creative ideas, but often they come in the remit of a news story. There might be interviews with a certain member of your company. You've seen all the interviews in the national media, on television, but again, that usually comes around an expert opinion piece, a pitch, and then it might be product reviews. That's another way. If your company might not have a product that is appropriate for reviews or for journalists to try out, this is another popular way that you can do it right. You can guarantee that exposure, is if you ask journalists to try out your particular product, for example. So those are the ways to guarantee positive media exposure for your company, regular and on an ongoing basis. So I hope that helps. Thanks very much for your time.